Greetings, my friends. Today, as promised, we're looking at the Desolator Marines and the Vindicator Laser Destroyer. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how you should be fielding these on the battlefield and which one's going to suit your army best. So let's get into this video. For most of 9th edition, it's been really difficult for Marines to bring D3 plus 3 damage at range to the battlefield. Obviously, the Vindicator Destroyer has been around for a while, but not in a very accessible kit. And now we've got the Desolators. So let's see how they get into it. And obviously, the Desolators are brand new, right? So the way that I would run them, if it was me, probably run Super Crack on all 5 of them. So that's 5 guys. So that give you Heavy 5, Strength 8, -3, D3 plus 3. These are standard Toughness 4, 2 wound Marines. 35 points a model. So your whole squad is going to be 175 points. 4 of them are going to be able to hit on 3s. They have the same rule as the Devastator squad, and it surprised me a little bit. If your squad contains the Sergeant, you're going to be able to make one model hit on a ballistic skill characteristic of 2+, essentially hitting on 2s. So 4 shots hitting on 3s, 1 shot hitting on 2s. Every model has a Castellan launcher, which is heavy D3, so realistically probably 2 shots, strength 4 -1, 1, and this is indirect fire and blast. So obviously you can't shoot it in combat, more shots if you shoot bigger squads potentially, and indirect fire as well. Bearing in mind, when you do fire indirect, you're -1 to hit if you can't see your opponent, and if they can't see you, it's +1 to save. So basically that makes it hitting on 4s and there'd be no AP, which is fine, I guess, but it's generally, like, indirect fire is really bad at the moment, unless you're Imperial Guard. If you're Marines, indirect fire is really bad. The Whirlwind, for example, costs 125 points and is lucky to do 1 or 2 points of damage per game now. Indirect, and it's higher strength, it's strength 6. Indirect fire is just really bad now. Which is good, because before it was actually kind of broken, but that's what you're going to get. So you're going to get 5 guys with super cracks, you're going to get 5 cast launchers. You can pay 10 points, and I guess what happened was they must have released these models like points costs before the Arks of Omen season, where they took all the war gear costs away, because technically Marines get free war gear now, so it's a bit weird that this costs 10. We had the same thing with the Brutalis last week when we realised it now costs 30 points for the multi-meltas. If you didn't see my video on the Brutalis, you should totally check out. Put a link up above. Anyway, you can take a Venger launcher on the Sergeant, and if you do take it, you also get this Targeter, which basically adds 1 to your hit roll. Notice that that's different, so you can still be hitting on 2s. You can make this guy the guy that's hitting on 2s and then get +1 to hit, giving you a 1-up hit, which could counteract some of the negatives of the -1 to hit with indirect fire. So you could have this Vanguard launcher hitting on 2s. It's heavy D6. You have to give up your super crack missile launcher to take it. The super crack launcher can be replaced with one Vanguard launcher and 1 target optics. I think it's worth noting, and I could be wrong here, but I don't think I am, you still get to keep your Castellan launcher. So even if you take the Vanguard launcher, you still have the Castellan launcher. The Vanguard launcher, strength 6, -1, 2 damage, but if you're ever firing it indirect, just assume that your -1 is going to be removed by the indirectness of the fire, which then puts it on the same sort of profile as the Whirlwind, and I already said the Whirlwind does no damage, and this is half as many shots. So I feel like this is going to do no damage. Maybe slightly, it might do 1 damage or it might do 2 damage because you potentially have that +1 to hit, but I don't think I'm ever paying 10 points for this Vanguard launcher. I think you're better off sticking with the super crack. Let's talk about the Vindicator Laser Destroyer. If you're not familiar with the Vindicator Laser Destroyer, it's pretty simple. It's a Toughness 8, 11 wound Vindicator. It doesn't have a Siege Shield, so it just has a 3-up save. Has less range than those super cracks. Those super cracks are 48, this is 36. It gets 3 shots, strength 9, so 1 more strength, same AP, D3 plus 3, or stay still to have the same 3 shots but strength 10, -4, flat 6. You can obviously overcharge if you move, but then potentially you take mortal wounds on rolls of 1, but with 3 shots maybe that's not the end of the world. If you're running Rebooty Gilliman, you could reroll your 1s, har 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 har, this could be actually fine. But typically I think you would stay still when you overcharge it, so you get the strength 10 and 6 damage. Obviously the Vindicator Laser Destroyer has Smokescreen, and I guess the Desolation Marines have Primaris, so the Vindicator Laser Destroyer could make itself -1 to hit. The Primaris guys, they could transhuman. And I hadn't actually considered that till we talk about it now. I guess you could transhuman the Desolators. But the 48-inch range for the Desolators makes me think that you want them super far back, on a building, in cover, throw on a 2-up save, 48 inches, hopefully find some fire lanes, do some damage that way. So both squads are 175 before you add any upgrades. And I thought to myself, if I get 5 of those Desolators and put them in cover, throw on a 2-up save, they're going to have more shots than the Laser Destroyer, they're going to have more range, the 2-up save is going to be nicer than the 3-up the Vindicator has, maybe these guys will be comparable. Here's the math. So survivability wise, I've put the difference of like how much more survivable the Vindicator Laser Destroyer is in green, because it is more survivable against everything that I've compared here. And I've put how much more survivable in the Desolators are if they're in cover. If they're getting that +1 save for being in light cover, this is how much, the small number in brown is how much more shots we'll need to kill them. So for example, like Storm Cannons, they're only -1 AP, so the Vindicator could survive 24 shots, the Desolators would be dead in like 15 shots, but if they were in that light cover, it would be 22.5. So this wasn't really what I was expecting. The Vindicator is a lot more survivable. And I thought maybe within the cover it would be averaged out, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, the Vindicator is double the toughness and it does have 1 extra wound. The caveat being that the Desolators, basically if they were getting hit by big weapons like las cannons or multi-melta or multiple damage weapons, then damage is never going to overflow, because once you take 2 wounds a guy is dead. But overall it does look like for the points cost the Vindicator is quite a bit ahead of it in survivability. Against small arms fire, it's miles ahead, between 300 and 175 better. Against some like strength 8 weaponry, again it's a lot ahead because that's double the toughness. And against some of the other sort of edge case ones, it's still ahead a good bit, between like 10 and 60%. So if both squads are 175 points, even if you have your Desolators in cover, the Vindicator is miles more survivable. If your Vindicator, if your Desolators are not in cover, then the Vindicator is like way better. I guess then it comes down to if you're playing Transhuman or Smokescreen, but that's up to you. Let's talk. I was going to say let's talk about damage, but first remember, if you do like any of my videos, please consider hitting that like button. It does help me out. Share the videos with a friend, and consider subscribing and click the bell. I put up a new tactics video every week. If you want to know about it first, then you need to turn on your notifications. Okay, let's talk about damage. So I did all the damage. So we do Super Crack, we do Castellan, we do the Vindicator Laser Destroyer when it was moving, or basically not overcharged, I guess, and the Vindicator Laser Destroyer if it was overcharged / stationary. And here's your damage numbers, and I did factor in that one of these guys is going to get +1 to hit, both for the Super Crack and the Castellan. Now this is not firing in direct. It's important to note. So if you were fighting the tough enemies to kill, and this is the tough enemies that I talked about just last week when we were looking at the Brutalis Dreadnought. You know, those enemies that you really need to get rid of and they're cause big problems for your Marines. Then basically you would just add these two numbers together. And the Super Cracks are decent with the I just want to call the Castellan what it is. It's incidental damage. Like, it will be lucky to take a wound off of just about anything. Any of these heavy targets, either take 1 wound or it'll do nothing. And that's like 10 shots coming out from those Castellans. If the Vindicator Laser Destroyer has to move, then sure, Super Crack and Castellan together are better. If the Vindicator Laser Destroyer can stay stationary, then it's very close. The Super Crack and Castellan are slightly ahead against like small armatures, but the Vindicator Laser Destroyer would be ahead against like big knights, probably just due to that flat 6 damage. So it almost is a case of like, if you want to do a little bit more damage, the Desolators are actually better. I mean, it makes sense, right? They have like 2 more shots, and they also have the 10 low damage missiles coming out. If you want to be more survivable, then it's the Vindicator Laser Destroyer. I guess you could also argue the Vindicator Laser Destroyer is more mobile because it can move about a bit. But, and personally, I like units where there's like rewards for clever plays, and a clever play with the Vindicator Laser Destroyer would be to move it somewhere that doesn't need to move in the following turn, so then it can shoot for that flat 6 damage. But I don't think the Desolators are like game-changing in any way, shape, or form. This is the same story as the Brutalis. These guys are doing like 1.5, 2 damage more in most situations. In fact, you know, 1 or 2 more damage, but in some cases, half is survivable. So, like, right now, looking at that, I prioritize survivability in my list. I know right now Marines are taking a big hit in survivability. So, what would I rather take? Probably the Vindicator Laser Destroyer, because it's very resilient against small arms fire. And, you know, it will draw... These things will draw fire. Same as, like, Super Crack. If you have a squad of 5 guys that are just Toughness 4, 3-up armor save Marines, they're going to draw fire if they can deal out, I don't know, 8 damage at 48 inches to an armature, right? They will draw fire. So in that case, I think I prefer the Vindicator Laser Destroyer personally. I also just wanted to look at, like, the underslung rockets. Are they any good? Because, let's face it, indirect fire is poor. And I guess, in this case, if we know against, like, Terminators, Dreadknights, Armigers, Mortarion, you're not going to do a single point of damage. Or you're going to, if you get lucky, you'll do 1 point of damage with those 10 Castellan shots. You're arguably going to not want to shoot. You're going to want to split fire. You're going to want to put the 5 Super Cracks into one target, and you're going to put the Castellan shots into the other target. It's a little bit tricky because both those weapons have different ranges. The Castellan has 36, the Super Cracks have 48. So that makes it a bit tricky. But if we're going to shoot the Castellans, and I've also put the Vengor down here, but let's just start with the Castellans. So this would be basically your 4 shots from the Castellans. 3 of the guys would be hitting on 3s, 1 of them would be hitting on 2s, and then we'd fire the Vengor launcher hitting on 2s. If we're firing this direct, if we're firing these like not indirect, so like we can see the enemy, we are going to do 3 damage to Marine. We're going to maybe kill a whole squad of Voidsmen at arms. Against like Necron Warriors, we're maybe going to kill 4 models. And against Orc Boys, we're going to kill maybe like 4, 5 wounds of damage into Orc Boys. So it's okay. I mean, it's something, you know, like killing a Marine in a half a turn. They're not really there to kill Marines. They're there to kill those big targets. So if they can do that sort of like chip damage to certain squads, it's not bad. However, I guess don't fire them indirect. If you fire them indirect, you basically lose half of the damage from both the Castellan and the Vengor. So at that point, you're not even killing a 2-wound Marine. You're maybe killing 3 Voidsmen at arms. You're maybe killing 2 Necron Warriors. You're maybe doing 3, maybe 4 damage to some Orc Boys. I guess the Orc Boys suffer here because they've got a really crappy save anyway. So I guess indirect into the Orc Boys is maybe okay. But indirect fire is generally pretty poor at the moment. People sometimes take the mick out of me or make fun of Blood Angels for running a Whirlwind. I think people that do that don't understand the Whirlwind doesn't do any damage. It's there for one reason alone, and it is to do suppression fire. In fact, these things actually probably do more damage than the Whirlwind, because this would be like 8 shots plus 3.5 on average for the Vengor. So this is more damage than the Whirlwind will do. So against like a squad of Marines, if you're shooting that indirect, actually, the Whirlwind's going to be very lucky to do a wound. It's probably going to do nothing, because you're probably going to hit on 4s, you're probably going to get like 6 shots, so you make like 3, wound on 3s, so you only make like 2 wounds, and then they got 2 2-up saves to make. So unless they roll Snake Eyes, or unless they roll a 1, you're doing 0 damage with a Whirlwind. Literally 0 damage to Marines. And they charge you 125 points for that, go figure, because for some reason the Whirlwind didn't go down in points, so you pay 125 points, you can't even do 1 damage to a Marine in cover. I mean, I guess if he's not in cover, you might be able to do 1 damage, but these numbers don't get me excited at all. I mean, for one, I'm probably not taking the Vengor launcher, right, because I have to give up one of my super crack missiles, and I think if you're taking the squad, you want the super crack missiles. The Vengor launcher numbers are not exciting enough. You know, like, it kills 1 Marine a turn. it's not, it's really not exciting enough. I mean, you could have Assault Intercessor with a chainsword will do more, you know, a 20-point model with a chainsword will do more damage. So, and you'd be paying 45 points for this guy with Vanguard Launcher. So yeah, I don't see how you would run the Vanguard Launcher. Maybe it's good for Iron Hands, or maybe it's good for like another Marine faction. It's not at all good for Blood Angels. If you're not sticking in Devastator Doctrine, and I guess all of these things are a bit more are a bit better in turn 1 in Devastator. That's obviously not calculated in, but for Blood Angels, these are not good. The Vanguard Launcher seems overcosted. I don't think I would run it into just about anything. And the Castellan Launcher might do a little bit of chip damage. Like, if you had 5 Castellan Launchers, maybe you kill 1 Marine. Direct fire, indirect fire, maybe you take a wound or something. Like, it's generally really bad. So the Undersun Lockets, it's just bad. And yeah, I don't know what to say. It's just bad. If you disagree with me, feel free to leave me a comment and tell me how you disagree with me. So my thoughts on these. First thoughts on the Desolators was cool. Marines have been desperate for D3+3 firepower. It's been really tough having really only Meltas to rely on. On one hand, it's great we're seeing some long range 48-inch D3+3, and like we get a good number of reliable shots. That's one of the big problems with the Redemptor Dreadnought, is like its plasma cannon has D6, so it's horribly unreliable. However, it does feel like a bit of an FU on everybody's las cannon Devastators, especially as the Sergeant gets the same. He also gets a heavy weapon, and he also gets to use the +1 to hit from the Signum ability, which is basically the same as the Cherub. So like, for all intensive purposes, these guys are intended, I think, to replace las cannon / missile launcher Devastators. They are supposed to do both a bit of indirect fire and a bit of direct damage, but I mean, indirect fire has been nerfed to the ground. The weapons have different range as well, 12 inches less than the primary, so I mean, that's going to make it difficult. Like, if you want the plan that I'm saying, like deploy them far back on a building, try and get them in cover to get some like pop shots across the map, maybe targets are out of range. I think it's always awkward when you've got one weapon with or you've got one model with 2 different profiles / ranges. So yes, sometimes you won't even get to fire those. I think you want to put the Desolators in a terrain feature, either -1 to hit or +1 to their save. I think -1 to hit might actually be stronger because you can always transhume in them as well, so it would like flow down better. But even in cover, I feel like they have a lot less survivability than the Vindicator Laser Destroyer. If the Vindicator Laser Destroyer doesn't need to move, then its damage output is very similar, and I really do like units that have like some sort of meta level that rewards a smart play. You know, get them into a good position, you don't need to move, and then you get that extra damage from your next phase of shooting. That's why I used to really like Aggressors. There used to be a rule where Aggressors, you didn't move them, you could shoot twice, and it was really quite cool, and it rewarded smart play. So I like models like that. I just think if you're desperate for the D3+3 firepower, I think realistically the Vindicator Laser Destroyer seems like the better option. And something that I've not said is the second that you do move those Desolators, let's say you try and start them in cover and the opponent decides, well, the Desolator squad's back there with the firing arc, I'm not going to walk into the firing arc. The second you start moving them, they're going to become -1 to hit. And then the Vindicator Laser Destroyer is probably even ahead in damage if you factor in -1 to hit. You just need to take the numbers down like 16%. So if we say that like, you know, what's the one that's most ahead of? It would be this one, where this is like 8.3 against 6.2. Well, you need to take it down 16% if they move, because it's -1 to hit. So if you take it down 16%, because that is basically one pip of a d6, take that down 16%, then they're identical, basically. So the second you have to move the Desolators, the Vindicator Laser Destroyer is just as good, and we already said it's basically way more survivable. And I feel right now Marines' survivability is in a really bad place. Toughness 4 Marines with a 3-up save just die left, right, and center. So that puts me off Desolators. Even though I did just buy them, and I feel like I'm probably more likely to run them than the Brutalis Dreadnought, I'm also put off with the Brutalis Dreadnought because of survivability. The Marines just need like a 6-up invuln on power armor or something. Like, what do we need to get Marines feeling like, you know, Armor of Contempt wasn't the solution, obviously, because they've gone away for it, but maybe there's another solution that they need to figure out to get Marines back to where they need to be. Because we have such disparity in Marines, where you've got Blood Angels sitting on a 45% win rate, you've got Dark Angels sitting on a 59% win rate. Like, they need to narrow this somehow. Yeah, so that's my tactical thoughts. And then in conclusion, I actually just bought a Vindicator Laser Destroyer, which I'm yet to play with, but I am quite excited to try it. And they did just announce this week that we're going to get a new plastic Vindicator kit, and it looks like it's going to have those Laser Destroyer options. So if you did avoid Strike Force Augustus, and I know a lot of people did, because I guess I think it's people didn't like the Desolator troops, or didn't like how they looked. It's 40,000 Millennium and it's a rocket launcher. I mean, that didn't really bother me, I guess. But maybe now it's time you thought about Vindicator, because I think that's going to be your best option. I think the Desolators, for me, I'm going to give them like a 7.5 out of 10. I can't see them being all that useful for Blood Angels unless it's like the perfect map with a perfect deployment with fire lanes and maybe the enemies within 36 inches, so you can use some of that indirect fire. I think the safer play here is just going to be the Vindicator Laser Destroyer. I also think that the Vindicator Laser Destroyer has a weakness in that it has no invuln save. But it's toughness 8, and toughness 8 stuff usually lingers a little bit more. It can be smokescreen, and I think the additional survivability, like the indirect fire missiles, just don't make up for the difference. So, yeah, my thought 100% is Vindicator Laser Destroyer. Maybe it's even an 8.5. I think I rated it low because I generally don't like 200-point models. I know it's only 175, but I guess it's in the ballpark of 200 points. I don't like 200-point models that don't have an invulnerable save. Toughness 8 is obviously better than a Redemptor, and arguably this is cheaper than a Redemptor, so yeah, maybe it's an 8.5. Maybe it's been overly harsh here, but an 8. So, join us next week for more tactics videos. If you didn't see my breakdown yet of how I ran Rebuta Guilliman to a GT and how well it did, then I'm going to link that video up above. A lot of people didn't watch it. I don't know if I didn't title it correctly or what, but the Rebuta list was awesome fun. It's probably the most fun I've ever had a GT. Please check out that video if you didn't check out yet. And I'll be back next week with more tactics videos. If there's something you're desperate to see, please just leave it in the comment down below, and I will, of course, get to it. As always, thank you so much for sticking to the end of the video. I have been John, the Blood Angels Commander, and you have been awesome for watching to the end. I will catch you in the next one, my friends. By the blood are we made strong. Peace.